So I sit here not only as the outgoing legal and ethical chair, but also as a member of NAR Professional Standards. And I wanted to update you on some important additions to the code that you're going to need to know going forward. So first, I'm going to go over two case interpretations. The first one has to do with use of symbols. And you may have heard this one come down. So let me kind of explain it. People were searching real estate listings on a brokerage website, and a potential home buyer noticed a listing with a Confederate flag prominently displayed in the property photos. She filed an ethics complaint against the listing broker, alleging Article 10 is interpreted by Standard of Practice 10-3 and Standard of Practice 10-5. The complainant argued in her complaint that the Confederate flag is a symbol of racial exclusion, and that the listing broker's display of the photos conveyed a preference and discrimination based on race. The grievance committee reviewed it and forwarded it for a hearing. At the hearing, the complainant testified that she felt threatened by the display of the Confederate flag and took it to mean that she would not be welcome in the home or the neighborhood if she was to make an offer on the property. The listing broker testified that he shouldn't be held responsible for what's displayed in the client's home and could not offer an explanation for his client's motives in displaying the flag. Here's what happened. So, by the way, all of these case interpretations are real. Lindsay and I were discussing that before. They bring them out with listing broker A and B and buyer, but these are real cases from across the country, and these are the real results going forward. So the hearing panel concluded that the listing broker is indeed responsible for the content that they display publicly when engaging in real estate brokerage. The hearing panel also discussed whether the flag indicated an illegal preference of discrimination, using the standard of whether a reasonable person, and that's the standard here, reasonable person. I don't know, have any of you ever met a reasonable buyer seller? I've had 2 or 3 over 4 decades. But the standard is a reasonable person would think that the Confederate flag conveyed a discriminatory preference. And they concluded that the listing broker's inclusion, intentional or not, because sometimes you don't see something in the photo, indicated indicated racial preference or illegal discrimination, and they found him in violation of Article 10 as interpreted by 10-3 and 10-5. So we need to be really careful when we're working with symbols. Another example could be a swastika. We had a lot of intense conversation on this subject, a lot of at the forum, especially before Professional Standards Committee convened. We had some discussion as to, is this a slippery slope? Are we going to get in trouble for, if there's a cross displayed or a Star of David? And we decided that while those are symbols, they're not exclusionary. They're not racially motivated. They're not slurs, those sorts of things. So, this is the first one. Be careful with the symbols because they can be liable. The second one is case 10-10. This is also a case interpretation on Article 10. In this situation, there's a realtor who leads a Bible study group in the evenings. During one study group, he led a discussion of biblical passages concerning homosexuality, referencing several different interpretations of the said passages. At one point of the discussion, Realtor A, who was leading the study, said, some of these verses clearly prohibit and condemn same-sex relationships. An attendee of the group found this inappropriate and filed an ethics complaint in violation of Article 10, specifically 10-5. After review, the grievance committee forwarded it for a hearing. The complainant argued that Realtor A's statement represented his own personal beliefs about homosexuality. Realtor A, who was leading the Bible study, confirmed that the complainant had quoted him correctly, but argued that he presents all sides of the biblical interpretation for historical context, and he is careful to leave any personal opinions out of the study group, as evidenced by his use of the words "some have said." So what happened? The hearing panel entered executive session and considered this violation of Article 10, specifically 10-5, and they concluded that Realtor A's comments were not intended to convey a discriminatory opinion and did not constitute the use of hate speech or slurs, and he was found not in violation of Article 10. So those are two case interpretations that we voted on. They'll be in the new arbitration manual and Code of Ethics and Arbitration Manual. The next thing is changes to the code. And there were a couple of significant changes to the code. The first one has to do with Standard of Practice 1. Article 1. Specifically, there's going to be a new standard of practice, which is 1-8. If you recall, and you've been on the committee for any length of time, back in 2019, we had standard of practice 1-7, and it said that the listing agent, if asked, had to make an affirmation that the offer had been presented on behalf of his buyer. So the listing agent had to say, yeah, I got your offer, it's received, and I have presented it. And they had to make an affirmative statement to that fact. We decided that in order to, right now, that was in response back in 2019 and still today, of a seller's market. Markets differ, and the Code of Ethics is applicable in every market. So if we think about it, we needed to have somewhere in there to say that the seller's counter to the buyer was presented to the buyer's agent, right? We discussed at length whether that was just tit for tat or there was a problem. About 7 members of the committee said they've seen this problem where they don't believe that the buyer's agents are presenting the seller's counter back to the buyer. So standard of practice 1-8 says, if asked, buyer's agents must provide written affirmation that the counter offer has been submitted to the buyer tenant. So pretty easy, kind of in line with 1-7. In the listing agent's obligation, now buyer's agent has the same obligation to present that counter offer from the seller. The second one is standard of practice 12-1. Article 12, if you remember, is your marketing article. So realtors cannot advertise their services as free. So unless they're not going to get paid by anybody in the transaction. I've seen it multiple times where buyer's agents will say, my services are free to you. Well, they're not free to everyone because the seller's paying your commission or whatever the case may be. So no longer can you advertise your services as free unless you are receiving absolutely no compensation. So, and this aligns with the new MLS policy statement 10-0 as well, which says the exact same thing. The next one would be, and I really like this. Thank you to all of my ombudsmen out there and all my mediators who've taken the training and who continue to do great work keeping things out of grievance and professional standards. I think we've had a pretty good success rate in being able to solve these things before they get to a hearing. So thank you to you guys. We're amending NAR local and state ombudsman service policy to authorize both ombudsmen and mediators the ability to resolve disputes and hear disputes involving the public trust. In the past, that was the one thing they couldn't hear. They could hear ethics, they could hear arbitration, but anything that included the public trust, we weren't able to hear. Now we're able to potentially solve some of those difficult cases as well. And the last thing is, we're kind of dealing in the virtual world now. So we needed virtual hearing guides. The professional standards had a subcommittee that was tasked with writing these. They'll be added to the arbitration and ethics manual here coming up. And they cover all the things that a hearing chair would have to do in professional standards. The entire process is best practices for virtual hearings so that we can conduct those virtually. It's been a pleasure serving as legal and ethical group chair. I'd like to thank the chairs and co-chairs and all the members for your dedication to the profession